All right. So to start with, this is based on the topic given. This is the outline. We'll try as much as possible to cover this. Um, uh, as I said, I'll give you an overview to help us understand what environmental and social safeguards consist of, or what it, when we talk of safeguard, what it means. I will look at the country safeguard system, that is in reference to Ghana, and then I'll provide an overview of the safeguard policies and environmental framework of the World Bank. We'll look at environmental and social risk and impact in World Bank finance projects. And then I'll basically look at some of the tools, what we call instruments. And that's how related to what is specifically asked me to talk about, which is the environmental impact assessment. And then we'll look at the skill sets and some concluding remarks. But before I move on, just to make a few points here, because sometimes when you're making a presentation, you will be using some languages and terminology, and the audience needs to understand what you're talking about. So I'll be mentioning, and maybe I might be talking about a borrower or client. So first, we need to understand, when we say the World Bank, we have the World Bank Group, which is made up of 5 institutions: International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, International Development Association, IDA, and then we have MIGA, which is Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. Then we have the IFC, which is the International Finance Corporation, and then we have another one, which is International Center for Settlement of Disputes. Now, when we talk of the World Bank, rather than not the World Bank Group, we talk of the World Bank, we're talking about IBRD and IDA. The two constitute the World Bank. So I work for the World Bank, which is the two institutions. Their management is the same. And the main client of the World Bank are national governments. So we deal with governments, and there are about 199 countries which are members of the World Bank. When you talk of the IFC, that is the private sector wing of the World Bank Group. So IFC basically deals with private sector, and of course some activities that may involve the government, but the main counterpart is the private sector. Then we have MIGA. MIGA is one of the World Bank Group institutions, and they provide what I'll call political risk insurance for investors. So countries that are in conflict or in conflict generally, investors will have to have some assurance or some guarantee that any investment they go to put there, they are able to recoup their money. So you want to go into an area like Afghanistan to work as an investor, but the country is under conflict. So you want that insurance that any money put there, the government should be able to pay. So that is MIGA. And so I just wanted to clarify this so that in the heat of talking, when I mention something, I think you'll be able to follow more precisely. So with that, I think we can start the presentation, and then I think somebody will be monitoring the questions, maybe Tony or somebody, and then we'll have questions at the end, but maybe at relevant areas, I could pause briefly. Sometimes you have some issues, some questions that may are burning issues that you need clarification, and then we stop and move on. But we'll try to finish and have time for more questions at the end. So safeguard, what is it about and what is it? You know, development does not take place in a vacuum. Every development activity has got you need to use some resources, natural resources in particular. So it is very important that in all these kind of activities, when you're having development activity, you need to anticipate and address environmental and social concerns that will come from such an investment project and the sub activity. And in promoting sustainable development, you then require to have measures, pass laws or legislations that will seek to protect environment and people from any potential adverse impacts of development projects. So various countries have specific set of requirements to guide and to assess and manage this potential adverse impacts from the use of resources and to ensure that people's lives are protected. In the same way, funding institutions, what I call the IFIs as the international finance institutions, also have their policies. So these IFIs will constitute the World Bank or the World Bank Group for that matter. We have AFDB, that's African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. As examples, they also have specific set of requirements. So while countries will have their laws to ensure that in trying to invest in projects, environment and people are protected, the same way financing institutions, international banks also have developed set of policies. Now, individual countries would call them differently from what this IFI is called. And the development of safeguards goes back to the US. In 1969, they developed their National Environmental Policy Act. And within that policy, they had put an environmental impact assessment, the requirement to do an environmental impact assessment for every project that should be undertaken. Same way, Ghana also has legal and institutional frameworks for environmental and social, and this lies across so many institutions, but mainly within the EPA. We cannot talk of any environmental requirements without recourse to the EPA, especially regulations. Its regulations, LI 1662. So a country like Ghana or the US may call the laws and regulations, but for IFIs, we refer to it as safeguards, environmental and social safeguards. And so the World Bank has, currently we have two sets of safeguards, what are called safeguard policies, we have what is essentially compliance, that is policy, and then since 2018, October 2018, we have the new environmental and social framework that has been put in place. We'll talk about that gradually. But I just wanted to understand that currently we are running what I probably will link it to or liken it to a dual system that we are running now for some time, and then we'll go to the UNS framework. Now, the objectives of the policies and the framework are to prevent and to mitigate undue harm to people and their environment. And of course, we include social impact. So when we talk about environment, naturally or generally, we tend to mean that it's environment and social. So that is why safeguards is kind of important and is developed not as necessary to slow down development, but it's because in recognition of the fact that we will definitely have to use resources in whatever activity that we seek to do in any investment project. So for the World Bank, we refer to regulations and laws of the member countries as country systems. So when we talk about country environmental and social systems, that is simply what we would, in our institution, would say safeguard. So every country system will comprise its policies, legal and institutional framework that has put in place to avoid, minimize, or mitigate any potential harmful environmental and social impact of its development activities. And this sometimes includes relevant international agreements to which the country is party to. So for instance, I know Ghana, for instance, is signatory to the Rio Declaration on Environment, and then the Sustainable Development Goals. We have some ILO conventions which the country has signed to ensure that it protects safety of workers. So to give some examples, I make reference to the Constitution of Ghana. Of course, that's the umbrella law of the country. And if you look at the directive principle of state policy and the economic and social objectives and international relations, specifically, you will see that the state is mandated to take appropriate measures needed, including enacting laws to protect and safeguard national environment for posterity. So 41 similarly makes it obligatory for every citizen of the country to protect and safeguard the environment while exercising and enjoying their rights and freedom. So this kind of tells you that the state by itself, or every country, by itself also has laws and regulations that it recognizes are important to ensure that when we use resources, we have in mind that it has to be used for the present and the future. And at the same time, the Constitution recognizes its responsibility to international agreements. So in trying to address global issues, of course, the Constitution recognizes these broad principles that we have to take into account regarding environment and social. Of course, as land economy, we are all very too familiar with Article 22 and 3, which talks about the state authority to compulsory acquire land for public purpose and to resettle displaced persons. This is clearly a safeguard issue. I mean, the state has the right to take land, but it must do so under law. And when people are to be displaced, the state has the responsibility to ensure that these people are properly resettled. So, drawing from the Constitution, specific national laws have been passed. And as I said, the main environmental agency relates to EPA. If you look at the EPA Act 1994 at 490, and then its accompanying LI 1652. These two clearly spell out what is required under the environment. We'll look at this a bit more detail in next. Then, of course, we have the Minerals and Mining Act, which regulates the mining sector and land being taken from communities in order to access resources. And then recently, I understand the Land Act, which has been in the pipeline for so many years, going back to when I was even working on the land registration project. I think it has been passed by Parliament. So I guess I'm right, Ben. If I'm wrong, tell me. Okay.
You are right.
All right, thank you. Yeah. I didn't get the act number, but maybe you can tell me later. But I know
it's yet to be assented by the president.
All right, thank you very much. So let's just look at what the environmental assessment regulation that the EPA is. Under LI 1653, it has schedules. And Schedule 1 provides a list of undertakings that will require registration with the EPA and issuance of an environmental permit. So any investment, whether government, public or private sector, if it is within these areas, agriculture, forestry service, mining and quarrying, highways and heavy construction, or waste disposal, will require a permit that is supposed to be issued by the EPA. The second schedule, Regulation 3, also lists undertakings for which the EIA is mandatory. Now, you see that I did the S in red font. It's basically, but in the law, it says EIA. And I remember once I asked one of the directors in EPA when I was in Ghana that why don't they reflect the social aspect of the EIA? And they said, well, they define environment to include social. So when they say EIA, it means ESI, that includes social. Whereas for the bank and other IFIs, we tend to kind of be more explicit and say ESI. So it's the same when you see EIA or ESI, basically it's the same. But then Schedule 2 makes it clear that these are mandatory. Any activity in the agriculture sector, housing, mining, infrastructure, forestry, waste treatment and disposal, and of course, if you make reference there, you see a lot. These activities in this area are mandatory to have an ESI that is supposed to be prepared and approved in accordance to the environment and the regulations, the provisions of the regulation. So it tells you clearly that the state or every country, and EPA, of course, may be referred to differently in various countries, but the bottom line is that every country has a set of environmental and social rules and regulations that must be followed in terms of certain activities, be it public or private sector investment. And a couple of the schedules clearly spell out what scoping and EIA notice needs to do, and then also some environmental sensitive areas that perhaps that don't have to be touched or have to be touched in a certain under certain specific conditions. And these are clearly spelled out. Now, I just gave this background for us to understand that safeguard is not It's not necessarily an invention of any international financing institution. And the reason why I've done this is because sometimes in engaging with the people, tend to look at, well, this is the example, this is the World Bank's regulations, or this is the World Bank's requirements. No, it isn't. Every nation has its rules and regulations. And indeed, as we'll learn very soon, the World Bank doesn't support any activity per se, per its own regulations, without recourse to the national laws. The national laws will have to be assessed, and if there are any gaps between the national laws and international best standards, that is what needs to be addressed to ensure that in terms of applying the national laws, we do a little bit more to bring it up to international standards. So that is the background to it. And so, whereas IFIs may call it safeguards, the rules and regulations that exist in the country that mandates institutions to conform to certain standards and do things in a certain procedure are also safeguards the environment and social. Now, let's look at the World Bank. The World Bank has policies. We call them operational policies. And then we have the environmental and social framework. And these policies and procedures were first came into being in the 80s. And it made it a requirement to integrate environmental and social considerations when developing projects in member countries. So the World Bank's E&S, which are safeguards, essentially are designed to avoid, if possible, or where not possible, will minimize impacts. And after minimizing, you need to mitigate the hardships that may come. And of course, after trying to minimize impacts or trying to mitigate, there are going to be sometimes the residual impacts. And these residual impacts will have to be compensated for, or in terms of environment, you offset this residual impact. So for every project that is financed by the World Bank, and remember, the World Bank doesn't have its own projects. It finances, it supports member countries' projects. So as I indicated earlier, IBRD provides financing to middle income, kind of a big advanced countries. So Ghana is a middle income. It will not qualify for either. Either looks at very poor developing countries, so it gives them grants and very low rate concessionary loans. So Ghana, for instance, most of the projects that are financed in Ghana will be from IBRD. That means they are loans, they are not grants. If you take a country like Liberia or Sierra Leone, they may be qualifying for grants sometimes. And so these standards need to be fulfilled when the bank has assessed the country's policies and things that maybe they are not up to best practice, and then they identify the gaps and see how best they can make sure that taking the project they are up to that standard. So the World Bank encourages its borrowing member countries, and as I said, under IBRD we have over 189 member countries. Under IDA, we're over 176 countries. So we see that some of the IDA countries or some of the IBR countries qualify as IDA countries, so the numbers overlap. And as much as possible, the World Bank encourages borrowing member countries to adopt and implement systems that meet the objectives of its policies or its safeguard policies, while ensuring that development resources are used transparently and efficiently to achieve desired outcomes. So one may wonder, let's look at first the policies, and then we'll talk about the environmental and social risks. The environmental and social policies, which we normally call safeguards, when they started in the 80s, were more on the nature of compliance. So you need to comply to certain standards, certain requirements. And these policies were approved by the bank's board to ensure that environmental and social considerations go into decision making regarding projects. And they are mainly focused on evaluation and management of environmental and social risk and impact. And they also set aside certain tools or what we call instruments. So the ESIE or the EIE in the case of EPA Ghana are some of the tools that we see that are also recommended to be prepared depending on the nature of the project. Then the policies support participatory approaches and transparency in decision making. One of the key things and the key requirements for every World Bank finance project, and for that matter, other IFIs, is that there has to be strong engagement with the community. Now, under safeguard policies, this was there, but sometimes there's no any initial requirement to prove or to show some of these approaches that you engage with the community, even though it is documented. But we will see under the new ESF that this has become more or less explicit requirements that you need to put before even the project is approved. So this kind of tells, is the background to how the safeguard policies of the bank came into being and being implemented. And as I said, we have a new ESF. So what are the requirements of the safeguard? So for some of you I know are I've seen or are very familiar with the bank policies. We call them operational policies. The policies, the safeguard policies that came in the 80s, kind of in the 90s, are operational policies. So you see OP. So OP 4.1, OP 4.12, operational policies. And for every operational policy, there is a bank procedure. So the operational policies are what the clients need to know, and the bank procedure is guidance to bank staff on how to guide the client in implementing the operational policy. And so the requirements of these OPs are that they outline environmental, social, and legal concerns of every project during its design and implementation. And the policies are couched in a way that seeks to ensure that there's no harm done to people and the environment from any adverse impact in all bank projects. Now, it is not just about doing no harm, but also trying to see the good aspect, to do good, to take opportunities to ensure that even though you seek not to harm people and the environment, you identify opportunities that can enhance social equity and promote environmental sustainability. So for sometimes when a bank is financing projects, like say a transport project, along the transport corridor, they may be providing boreholes. Depending on the community need, they may provide maybe a clinic. That's a critical. That is an additional do good effect of constructing the road. And as I said, every policy has some instruments that will help to mainstream the environmental and social concerns into development projects. So we have a lot of operational policies, but for environment and social, these are the very relevant ones. So we have what we call the OP 4.1, which is basically focused on environmental assessment. And then we have one that looks at natural habitat, that's OP 4.04. We have a policy on forest, which is OP 4.36. One on pest management, OP 4.09. Safety of dams, 4.37. On the social side, again, here I think most of you may be familiar again with involuntary resettlement, and that's OP 4.12. Now, when you say involuntary resettlement, basically the compensation issues and all that come under this one. And then we have indigenous peoples policy, which is 4.10. I think there's a definition and criteria for indigenous people, and I would say that for West Africa, no country has indigenous people as defined under 4.10, and this is across UN agencies. Then we have a policy 4.11, which looks at fiscal cultural resources, protection of cultural heritage resources. Now, we are put two other policies. There are more legal, but sometimes when we're doing safeguards, we tend to look at them because some investments are cross-border. For instance, if you are doing Ghana intends to build a dam, or on the other way, if Burkina Faso intends to build a dam on the Volta, the black Volta and that is the white Volta have their source from Burkina Faso. They would have to consult and inform Ghana because whatever they do upstream has an impact downstream. And so we have projects on international waterways. There's a need, there's a procedure to follow, and it must satisfy that procedure if the World Bank is to support. Then we have some projects in disputed areas, maybe in conflict area, internal conflict or cross-border conflict. So if we are doing a project, I think it's a project, for instance, from Uzbekistan to Afghanistan to Pakistan, a transport transmission line. These three countries will have to be notified and agree because some of the transmission line will be going through conflict areas. And so there's a certain guidelines and policy need to be made. So when we talk about policies, environmental and social policies, safeguard policies within the World Bank, you might say either 10 or 8+1, what do you call it, policy. Sometimes we refer to it as 8+1 policy, or say 10 if you add the legal and the environment and the legal policies with. I mean, this is just a bit of information expanding on the policies. I will leave that just some information for you to look at the objectives of each policy. And normally for OP 1.1, we refer to it as the umbrella because for most projects, this policy is triggered. And when we are referring to policies, the World Bank's environmental and social policy, you tend to hear this word triggered. It's when the bank has assessed or screened the project at initial stage and identified that this project is likely to will require an environmental assessment, then we say it has to get OP 4.01. The screening project may identify that this project is likely to impact natural habitat. Then we say that it has triggered OP 4.04. So you tend to hear that word triggered a lot with the bank financing project. People are very familiar with it. That's what it has triggered. It sets the project, it sets the policy of that's what it means. So this just note, I think when we share the presentation, we can just look at what each policy does. The same way with 4.1 with that with fiscal cultural resources also, for example, indigenous people. I mean, there's a clear definition. Indigenous people would have to meet a certain criteria for people to be said to be indigenous within that definition. And when a group of people meet that definition, then OP 4.1 is triggered and there are certain requirements to be met.
Sorry, Charles.
Yes.
Just to cut in, please, can you speak up a bit?
Okay.
It's
going down, right?
The voice, it keeps fluctuating. Okay. So if you can speak up.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. So 4.12 has got to do with involuntary settlement. So if government of Ghana wants to construct a road or they want to do any activity and want the bank to support, then we have to look at, for instance, if it's within a very dense area or on a road that goes to an urban area, it's likely to impact people. And those people may require to either be physically relocated or they may be inconvenienced for a certain time. And so this policy will be triggered and it will look at what needs to be done to ensure that they do not unduly suffer because of their land being taken. And this is one of the policies that for us as social development specialists, we tend to focus more on as well as the 4.10. Yeah, so these are also, but again, this one, which is access to information, the bank has a very explicit policy regarding access to information. It requires that every single project information is made available publicly. There is nothing secret about any country borrowing, going for a loan for banks to support its project, and that information should be hidden from the public. It has that open access, and so every single project that a bank has financed or will finance is supposed to be on the World Bank's external website. At the same time, it is supposed to be publicly consulted and disclosed in country in a manner that is accessible and understood to all people, especially for the directly impacted people. So there's no way that a bank will be supporting a project and access to information about who will be impacted, the area the project will take place cannot be made available to people. In that case, the bank was not even going to approve because this information has to be declared well in advance at the board before they can approve it. So it's not a safeguard per se policy, but it's one of the requirements that we need to look at. So this is the safeguard policies. This covers all the safeguard environment and social policies of the bank. And as I indicated at the beginning, we have these policies running now, and what we call the environmental and social safeguard framework also started, and I'll make that clear shortly. I don't know if somebody has any quick questions for the clarity, otherwise we go to the second phase.
Charles, please continue. We have a session for Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so for a moment, just take your mind off what I talk about environmental and social policies, which I called were more suited or were more developed in the nature of compliance. You have to tick the boxes. And these policies started in the 80s. But over time, in the implementation of those OPs, operational policies, a lot of lessons were learned, new developments came up, world dynamics changed. So we have current issues like climate adaptation, have greenhouse gas emissions. We have issues regarding diversity and inclusion, gender, disability, and also active involvement of stakeholders. These are issues that over time became very, were kind of captured in the implementation of the policies and realized that the policies did not adequately address them. So there was a need, therefore, to refocus how the policies operate. And most importantly, to shift from just compliance to risk and impact assessment of risk and impact management. So as a regard, from 2012, the bank began a process of consultation and to update and revise the operational policies. And these culminated in the development of environmental and social framework, which has 10 standards, and these were approved in August 2016. Now, it took 2 years for this to be well advertised and consulted with the member countries for it to become effective in 2018. So, as I said, the ESF, now if I use ESF, it means Environmental and Social Framework, now seeks to boost people's, kind of ask more protection for people and environment by promoting capacity and institutional strengthening and country ownership. Now, the I said that the bank's safeguard policies are not independent or will I say mutually exclusive of country policies and laws on environment and social. So it seeks to further enhance and build capacity of national laws and governments' ability to meet international standards when regarding environmental and social issues. It also consolidates the World Bank's existing environmental and social policies and then harmonizes them with those of other development institutions. If you take the World Bank's ESF and you compare it to the IFC performance standards, and again, maybe some of you are very familiar with the IFC's performance standards because those were developed somewhere in 2012 and there were 8 standards. Now, the World Bank's ESS and our IFC's performance standards are more or less the same. If you compare that to the Asian Development Bank's standards or safeguards, European Bank for Reconstruction and African Development Bank, they are more or less, they talk about the same issue. They may have different titles, but at least. So the World Bank and other IFI's environmental and social policies kind of are in sync. They align well and harmonizes with each other very well. And then also beyond that, the World Bank ensures that there's more transparency and accountability, include issues like non-discrimination and enhance public participation in project decision making, and of course sharing of benefits from projects. So the policies, the ESF is now effective, as I indicated, since 2012. Now, what that means is that all projects that the bank financed prior to 2008, prior to October 1, 2018, have to meet the requirements and standards of the operational policy. But effective October 1, for now, any new project that the World Bank has support has to be prepared in line with the requirements of the new standards. And we have 10 standards. I will touch on them briefly soon. And they didn't cover or they didn't address issues regarding international waterways and disputed territories. Remember, we had 2 legal policies that under OPs were in place. These have not changed. These are still working and are still relevant. Now, because we have old projects that were approved prior to October 1, they could not be asked to redo their instruments and meet the requirements of the new policies. So those policies or those projects would run until they are fully implemented. And you know, the life cycle of every World Bank project is between, on average, 5 or let's say 4 to 7 years or 4 to 6 years. So we're going to have the operational policies applicable to some projects for the next 5 to 7 years. And then since October 2020, every new project that we have declared or approved is being implemented under the new ESF. Now, the ESF also took into consideration the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So it addresses almost all the issues that are the Sustainable Development the goals. And one of the things that informed the environmental and social framework is the fact that it needed to be systematic, and needed to be modern, and needed to harmonize with other IFIs. So in terms of application of the 10 standards, it's no more maybe a project that's triggered OP 4.12 and OP 4.01 environmental assessment alone, but under the new ESF, all the 10 standards are either relevant at the start of the project or may require some assessment to determine whether all of them will be relevant or some are not relevant. So we don't pick and choose, or we don't look at which ones are applicable or relevant. But we say that they are all relevant unless otherwise assessment says that it is not relevant. So we apply the standards each time a project is approved. To apply all the 10 standards to assess and see whether or not they would be able to address the requirements under each of the standards. So this is how the ESF is structured. We have this book, which is the new ESF. It can be downloaded. Can you see this book? It is the Environmental and Social Framework document. It's on the World Bank's website. I've provided the link at the end. If you take that book, you see the vision for the World Bank's vision for sustainable development. Basically, the World Bank aims to eradicate poverty and to promote shared prosperity. And in doing that, the standards that are developed now clearly spell out the bank's responsibilities with accompanying directives, good practice notes for its own staff, whereas for the borrower, that is the member countries, the standards apply to all investment projects that they will do. And in addition to that, we have the environmental health guidelines and also guidance notes to each of the 10 standards so that it provides more understanding on how they should be applied and what is required under each standard. So the ESF basically moves from compliance to project risk and impact management to enhance and improve social and environmental performance that is consistent with international practice and obligations, and also aims to build capacity of governments to be able to achieve sustainable development. Now, in summary, this is how, or these are the 10 standards. Now, I wouldn't want to go much detail since this presentation is to give an overview, more or less a snapshot of what it means, safeguards, and what are required to be done. I just put this one there, and you realize that if you think back to the policies we're talking of, ESS 1 is more like the OP 4.01. So you have the ESS 1, you have to assess, manage environmental and social risk and impact. And the ESS 2, it looks at labor and working conditions. It looks at improving and protecting labor. So what every World Bank project is to ensure that there's nothing like forced labor or child labor. This policy has the requirements and assessments to be done to ensure that some of these things are eliminated and every worker is well protected. ESS 3 deals with resource efficiency and pollution. So here you're talking about the project will have significant greenhouse gas emissions. To what extent it impacts on the use of water, to what extent it impacts on pesticide use, because for each of these, if the project footprint would have impact to this, then there are certain requirements that need to be put in place. Then we have community health and safety. For every project, whether a transport project, a dam, or agriculture, you need to ensure that the community that is in the neighborhood is well protected. If it's a road, there's safety, transport safety measures are taken. If it's a dam, what measures are put in place? These are all community health and safety issues. Then, of course, we have the ESS 5. Again, this is land acquisition and restriction of use on land. Here, what are the requirements we met in terms of acquiring land, compensation standards that need to be met? Of course, ESS 5 and all IFIs, for instance, do not or frown upon forced eviction. So that is a criteria that is clearly there that for every development, there are certain requirements that need to be met. Then we have ESS, we talked about biodiversity and conservation and sustainable management of living natural resources. So the bank, for instance, will not finance any project that impacts on critical natural habitats. So if you have a bird sanctuary or in parts of Asia, India, and Sri Lanka, for instance, some of the rivers have dolphins in them. If the activity is going to have impact, it might impact this critical species, then of course, in most cases, it won't fund, and in some exceptional cases, depending on what the nature of the impact, the measures that are proposed to ensure that they are not going to be, the species are not going to be impacted, have to be, the case will have to be made for assessment. And then, of course, we have ESS 7. Now, in developing this ESS 7, you see there's a long and interesting name. Under OPs, we have a simple name, say indigenous people. During the consultations for the ESS, it became a very challenging thing to use the word indigenous people. So in the end, they have to merge all the names that came up. So for ESSM, we have a very long name, which is Indigenous People of Sub-Saharan African Historically Underserved Traditional Local Communities. This is what has been accepted. A lot of cases were made. So there are about 4 criteria that need to be met by any group to be accepted as indigenous. They have to have a strong attachment to land. They have a distinct language. They have a distinct political system. So that if this criteria is met, then you consider they are indigenous people. And then for that matter, any project that will impact them need to consider. You don't mix like the indigenous people with other people when you are doing a project. If the project is going to go through a group of people's area or land, and those people are deemed to be indigenous, there is a consultation. You don't mix them. They will require what you call free, prior, and informed consent, and a different set of instruments or plans are prepared on how to address issues concerning this group of people. Then we have ESS8, who talks about cultural heritage, protection of historic sites. Sometimes projects in West Africa, for instance, not so much, maybe North Africa, but in countries like India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, you have a lot of Buddhist temples. You have a lot of historical sites that sometimes are impacted by projects and need to be protected. Then we have ESS nowadays to financial intermediaries. Financial intermediaries simply refers to occurs in situations where a country may seek for financing to do on a project, but it doesn't implement it directly. It gives the money to a financial institution, which implements it on behalf of the national government. And so that becomes a financial intermediary. That arrangement between the bank, the arrangement between the country and that bank is also different. So it needs to be assessed separately from where the country itself and these institutions are going to implement the project directly. Now, under operational policies, we didn't have a specific standard or policy for stakeholder engagement and information disclosure, but this is now added and made more explicit. And so for every single project that is prepared for financing by the World Bank, there needs to be a stakeholder engagement plan. And this plan needs to be prepared before the board even approves the project. So this is a snapshot of what we have under the ESS as the 10 standards. So we have operational policies, 8 of them, and then we have ESS or environmental standards, 10 of them. That going forward, we all more or less going to be dealing with only ESS when old projects are ended. And one of the key characteristics is that there is that integrated approach, rather than looking at as in the operational policy where we look at environmental issues separately, social issues separately. Under the ESF, these things are brought together. So for instance, every standard may address environmental and social issues. And a typical example under ESS4, which is community health and safety, you're dealing with ecosystem services, you're dealing with road safety, the more a social issue, environmental issue. Under ESS, you are dealing with community livelihoods, you are dealing with indigenous people, you are dealing with habitats. So these are also kind of social and environmental issues. So that's how the new standards are. So, and that is why when you asked me to talk about social safeguards, I decided that I would rather try to talk about the two so that you understand that when you're talking about safeguards, you have the social specialist, you have the environmental specialist, but the two almost all the time work together, do the assessments together to determine the risk and impact nature of the project. Again, the ESF and the standards provide a process for adaptive management. So unlike under policies where certain requirements have to be met before the project has to be approved, under the ESF, there may be the need that you may realize that there are certain impacts and risks of the project that may not come in year 1. It may be happening in year 2 or 3. And for that matter, any requirement that needs to be done can be postponed or deferred to that time. At the same time, also a project that may be assessed to be say a substantial risk project. I'll talk about that soon anyway to know what is a high risk or low risk project. So a project may be assessed initially to be substantial risk, but then as the project progresses, it may become a higher risk. The ESF allows you to, escalate the risk level, or in the opposite way, you downgrade. A project could be assessed initially based on information available that it's a high risk project, but upon further assessment, and you could realize that the project probably is a moderate risk project. So under the ESF, that is possible. Under operational policy, a project starts at high risk and ends as a high risk project. That's the difference. Again, as I indicated, the ESF allows or has measures that support building capacity of government that will ensure that we have better development outcome. So that part, in sum, is what safeguard is about. That is environmental and social safeguards, country systems, country rules and policies. And for you to understand that, whether it is safeguards as denoted by IFI, or when we talk about country systems as each country has its policy and regulations, we are all talking about the same thing. The bottom line is that we want to ensure that for every investment project, the policies on environment and social are adequate and robust enough, and that we have the institutional capacity to address them, to ensure that people do not suffer unduly as a consequence or as a result of implementing a project. There's no project that is brought in to make people suffer, but then the end result sometimes is that people get worse off. And so if you follow those policies, country policies on environment, we are working towards a system where we will be able to ensure that people do not unduly suffer, and most importantly, are actually involved and engaged in the project right from planning to the end. That is what safeguard is about. It's not a strange word. It's not anybody's creation, but it's just what I'll call different terminologies used by financing institutions or countries. Now, to the second part, where we wanted to look at specifically environmental and social impact assessment. Now, every policy or standard of the World Bank for it, and of course EP, where we have the EIA, the measures put in place to address environment and social have to commensurate with the nature of the risk. If it's a higher risk, you put in more resources, you put in more measures. If it's a low risk, perhaps the level of risk, the level of resources, the level of resources of capital, human resource, or cash or whatever would have to match that. So I will start that by looking at risk and impact classification. Every single project that is undertaken will have to determine its risk level at the very beginning. So if say Ghana wants to undertake any investment project, let's say maybe a road project, that initial idea, and probably say maybe want to do a project, want to do urban roads, we'll have to kind of screen the project, the initial project idea, to find out if the project is going to be in an urban area, what are the likely environmental and social impacts. So in an urban area, the characteristics are people might be living very close, to, let's say if you want to expand the motorway, for instance. Yeah, the motorway may be such that people are already living there very close to the road. So if you have to move them, the nature of the impact to these people. So you screen the project. It's an initial activity to determine whether there will be a need for an environmental impact assessment. It is different from Ghana is doing their own needs financing to go and let's say renovate some buildings. But the renovation activity basically means that they're just painting the walls. They are not really changing so much. In that case, it's a low risk. It might not require a full environmental impact assessment. So to determine the risk level, you need to screen, and then after screening, scope. Scoping then means to what extent, how far do you go in terms of the assessment? Do you require to do a full impact assessment, or you need to do a management plan for the environmental and social risk? So screening leads to the selection of the actual tool or document to prepare, if I'll put it that way. Yeah. So screening under OP, under operational policy, we'll talk of a category A, B, or C project. Now, a category A project, for instance, could be you want to do a dam, you want to do an urban road. A category B project could be, let's say, you want to do a rehabilitation and extend or expand some office buildings. You do additional building to the existing one. So instead of having a one block, you want to add another block. So that kind of the impact, and maybe the land is already government land, or you need to acquire additional 10 acre of land, and that 10 acre of land currently there are, let's say, 3 people farming on it, they don't live on it. So the impact is different from where, for instance, that 10 acre of land, there are already 100 people living on it and farming and making a livelihood on it. The two are different with a category C project for us may be, let's say, you want to build the capacity of teachers. Government needs money to build capacity. It doesn't involve any fiscal structure. It's just money to build capacity. You buy equipment and build capacity for the people. But sometimes some projects seem like low risk or category C because, but then in actual fact, they may be high risk because if for instance, you want to build capacity or you want to change a system, you want to automate a system, you are buying computers and throwing away existing computers. That is e-waste. So the impact can be different. It may start as low risk, but if you look at the assessment, you realize that no, there's going to be a more impact to the environment because you are going to dispose of old computers, or within the project life, you may have to replace the equipment. So that's the dynamic. But under OP, as I said, you say category A, B, or C. But under the new environmental and social framework, projects are classified as high risk, substantial, moderate, or low. And in the nature of the ABC, high risk and substantial seems to be about the same, but depending on what the level of impact for environment and social is. Moderate and low sometimes are capacity building projects that you classify as such. Again, so these are some of the examples. If you are looking at a category A or a high risk, the nature is that the project impact is broad, that potentially irreversible impact. There's a major risk assessment, major and large risk assessment. So you are moving about 500 people to a new area. It's a major risk assessment, actual physical displacement. And then there's the use of hazardous material. And the examples are large scale infrastructure like hydro, mining, major examples. Compared to category A, category B projects are more narrower, can be mitigated, they are minimal land acquisitions, and mostly they are likely reversible. So you might be impacting on some forest, but the offset is such that it can bring back the forest after the project life. And then you get the ones with the negligible impact. Now, so we have talked about policies and we have talked about safeguards. But in all these things, remember we said that it's a working together. The World Bank is the financier, then the countries are the borrowers. And they all have their individual responsibilities during this assessment, of course, under the policies or whether or not you are using the standards. So the World Bank has the responsibility to screen every project and determine the risk level. And then it advises the borrower on the bank's requirements. So if you are an environmental specialist or you are a social development specialist, that is where you come in you do the assessment, and you advise the borrower, your counterpart on the borrower side. So every government project also will have an environmental and social specialist, and then you let them know the requirements, because this project would need to satisfy this. And these are requirements. So the bank has its responsibilities. And then it is the borrower responsibility to prepare each of the environmental assessment documents. So the bank has its specialists, but they don't prepare the assessment documents. It is the borrower. Now, in preparing the assessment documents, the borrower has to ensure that first it meets the requirements of its own laws. So any instrument, any document that the borrower presents has to first satisfy requirements of the EPA. If a district assembly is building an abattoir, for instance, and is being financed by the bank, what does the law, what does the EPA LI say? What does the Schedule 2 say? It says that it is mandatory for a permit to be given, and there is a standard report to be prepared. If the permit has to be given, it has to, the borrower has to show that, or has to prove that that has been that condition has been met, or in sometimes it's like that the project preparation timeline said that you say that this will have to be met before the money will be used to start the process. That's also acceptable. So you give recognition the fact that there is a requirement nationally that needs to be met, and that has to be done before the project. And also, it is the borrower's responsibility to consult with the directly affected people, as well as any other project affected, any other person who has interest in the project. So as I said, there is open and transparent requirement for project documents to be made available. Every single EIA or ESI that is prepared has to be publicly disclosed and made accessible. So if GES, for instance, think that are interested in, say, any project document, they can get the project. Every project again has a number or the project name. So, for instance, talk of local government capacity project. It has a P number, which is called a P code, or you just need the title, and you go to the bank's website, you type it in. It should give you information. It should tell you that this document is required to be prepared and it has been consulted. If it is not there, if there's no any document that says that an EIA has been prepared and consulted, then it means it hasn't met the bank's requirement. And that is one of the things as environmental social specialists you look out for, to ensure that that condition is met, because and it's at the bank's external website, so it's not internal. Internal, we will see it, but external, it has to be, anybody should be able to access it. And for category A or high risk projects, the borrower is always required to sometimes to use independent ESP. If you are doing a dam, you need an external and independent consultant to review it. That's all the thing. And then also the documents need to be disclosed in the country and in a language understandable and accessible by the project. So we know that ESIs or EA documents can be very huge and big. So the understanding and the compromise is that at least the executive summary should be well written, and that one should be translated into a local language. If you are doing a dam project or a road project in say my village, which is Sandema, you need to translate this executive summary into Buli and consult with the people. Otherwise, it's presumed that the people didn't understand what you are doing. So because the EA document sometimes is over 500 pages, 300 pages, depending on the risk. But at least the executive summary shouldn't be more than 50 pages or 20 in some cases, and that needs to be translated and disclosed in country. So I kept mentioning instruments or tools. Now, if you look at the EPA law, it says an environmental impact assessment, which to my understanding, they mean environmental and social impact assessment, or has to be done. So the slight difference between what the bank requires and what national law does, it requires is that Under EPA, or for that matter, most national laws, they require specific documents prepared because the project site, or when the project site is known. Now, because countries will normally go to an international finance institution like the World Bank to get money to prepare a project that they have conceived, it is sometimes presumed, sometimes realized that the government of Ghana may want to do road projects and they want to do, let's say, rural projects, but they haven't selected those roads yet. But they are going to be road projects and they are going to be in the rural area. So they may have a 100-kilometer road in Ashanti, 50-kilometer road in Western. That is roughly known, basically, and then the larger area known. But the specific corridor is not known. So the bank says that, okay, in that case, you need to do a framework document, provide guidelines, so that will address environmental and social issues. When the specific sites have been selected, they will assess according to those guidelines and then prepare specific instruments. So if you take the bank's policy guideline and the standards, you make room for framework document, which is environmental and social management framework. That framework will guide the preparation of environmental and social impact assessment when the specific site is known. So if any government wants to build roads, and let me use this example, want to build roads in Greater Accra, that includes Accra-Tema motorway. So we want to expand urban roads from single lane to dual carriage. But one particular road that will be included is Accra motorway. So the World Bank says, for those roads that we haven't decided yet, let's do an environmental and social management framework. It addresses and identifies the potential risk and impact. But for the Accra-Tema motorway, that is certain. It is selected. It is one of the reasons why the loan is being sought. So in that case, you do an environmental and social impact assessment specific to that road. And that is the difference. So wherever you see environmental and social management framework, it is broad area, no select site has been selected and no specific. But when you see a plan, then the plan means that the site is known and the issues address the specific environmental and social risk. So an ESIA would include an ESMP. So you identify the environmental and social issues and you develop a management plan on how to address them. And the management plan will include monitoring. I'll give you an example. The same way, if project activity will have impact on pests and the use of pesticides. So this pest management plan needs to be prepared because you have procurement implications. And then if you require the money to do either build a new dam or rehabilitate a dam, then there's a need for a dam safety plan. Of course, for a dam, if it's a new dam, you perhaps have an idea where the dam will be. So you do a dam safety plan. For the social, in the same way, if the project activity is likely to impact resettlement or to result in resettlement, but you don't know the site yet, but the activity you are going to do, for instance, you are going to do the Accra-Tema motorway, yes, that is known. You are likely to move people, so you have to do what we call the resettlement action plan. Where the site is not known, you do a resettlement policy framework. So in most cases, projects that governments present to the World Bank for approval or consideration tend to do the policy framework. And with a plan and clear written in the appraisal document, the project paper, that we know that this project would have a resettlement. And so when the time comes, we will do a resettlement action plan. But as I said, for under the new safeguard policy standards, every project has to have a plan on how to engage both the directly impacted and any other any other stakeholder that will be involved in the project. And remember, all these documents and instruments, when they are prepared, have to be publicly consulted and disclosed. There's no room for, we have done it, it's last minute, and so the bank should look at it. It always has to be disclosed. In fact, in the US government requires for high risk projects, a high risk environmental impact project, to be disclosed 120 days before the bank board approves it. So if it's not disclosed and does not meet that criteria, then they will abstain. And no project or tax team leader will want the US to abstain from its project because it has some implications, even though it's not a World Bank requirement, but at least every bank, every project will want that the US doesn't abstain or doesn't support the project. All right. So more specific in terms of guidance in how to prepare what do you call it, an ESI. An ESI is not just a desk exercise. You need to do a lot of work, desktop, and field visits. But most importantly, an ESI will involve a review of the borrower's policy, legal, and administrative framework. This is why it is important for every assessor, every environmental social assessor to have a clear understanding of the country's requirements in terms of environment and social. So as a land economist, for instance, you definitely have to have a very good understanding of what the country requires in terms of social issues, resettlement requirements. And then there have to be baseline data collection, there have to be strong analysis of alternatives, when to avoid or minimize project impacts, and then the E&S impact assessment itself. There has to be a management plan and monitoring, stakeholder consultation, disclosure, and so this is more or less like an outline of how an ESI will look at. And in terms of what it means to scope a project, scoping is the process of determining which are the most critical issues to study, and that involves the community participation. And for every activity you look at in the project, the preparation stage, construction, operations, or rehabilitation stage, you need to look at. Now, what do you do in an impact assessment? We need to identify the potential impact, positive, negative, direct, indirect, cumulative, or any significant impact. These are environment and social. And then be able to distinguish between those that can be mitigated from those that cannot, and those that are residual. And then you compare them to the standards, the national standards, the core bank standards. Sometimes there are gaps. If there are gaps, what does the project propose to do to ensure that the national requirements are able to meet the international standards? Sometimes it comes basically for enforcement or lack of capacity. I mean, generally, and I've asked this question before, at the EP, I asked why they don't, whether or not they have social specialists, and they told me it depends on the project. They don't tend to engage directly social aspects, but depending on the nature of the project, they do engage people. So it tells you that sometimes capacity could be lacking, or in terms of enforcement. These are just basically what is required to be done for higher risk and then low risk or category projects. For high risk, at least 2 consultations need to be done. But for other categories, no consultation is okay. So I said for an ESI has to have an environmental and social management plan. Sometimes you see action plan. So once you do the environmental and social assessment, you have to develop a management plan, the ESMP. And the ESMP will set what mitigation and monitoring institutions are required and who will do it in order to avoid or minimize the impact. And they propose these measures and you cost it as well. So again, these are just the background to how the EIA is done. And this is just for every ESIA, it needs to come with a management plan. And this is the management plan. The management plan needs to provide the activity done at the pre-preparation stage, or in some cases pre-construction stage, the potential environmental and social impact. What do you propose, and what do those propositions be? Are they based on the national regulation or World Bank standards? and who will be responsible and what is the cost. And then you go to the second phase, it is the construction phase, for instance, the operation phase, all the activities that have environmental and social impact need to be identified. So this is just a completed table I've put here. You can study basically touch on the environment issue for a project, a power plant project. So the activity was design, the potential impact, the measures proposed, the execution, and then the cost. And that was for the construction phase and the operational phase, because what was required to be proposed to be done. Then, of course, you have to have a monitoring plan. It's not just proposing a mitigation or management plan, but how to monitor. What do you do? Who monitors and does what? This is also, you need to provide some indicators. Of course, this of done project plan, you will know this much more. And then this also costed and added. And then this also monetary plan that needs to also addresses the same phase or the project life cycle. So this again, for the power plants that I showed, the construction phase, this is what is required, the impact, what, where, how, whom, and then the cost. Most of them here are environmental impact. Now, because most of us are, or let me say almost all of us are land economists with more to social issues, apart from those who perhaps have done some studies in environmental. So I just added this bit to talk about social impact, just to show what specifically, because what I are doing an environmental and social management impact assessment, or you are doing environmental and social management framework, you need the social aspect. And when you come to, and again, for some projects like a land administration project, sometimes the environmental impact is minimal, but you need to do specifically a social assessment to accompany the project. And so I just thought we should just discuss this briefly, that a social impact assessment is the process of identifying and managing the social impact of the investment project. Now, this is used to predict and to mitigate the negative impacts and also identify opportunities to enhance benefits for local communities and broader society. What do? The assessment process involves identifying and assessing the potential social impact. It's a risk you are looking at. So you are looking at the likely social impact. And most important, identify who is likely to be impacted and how. Then you understand the affected communities. You need to clearly understand who is impacted, who are these communities, what type of people. And then, of course, you develop the mitigation plan and also how the project could benefit from the communities, or the impacted people could benefit from the project. And accompanying that will be your monitoring and reporting strategy. So specific to social assessment, this is what needs to be done. I have shared some links where you can get more information on social assessments and some guidelines in preparing a social impact assessment, because I think that is one area that you really need, apart from understanding clearly what the national laws are. I mean, luckily for us, I think with the new Land Act, all our numerous land documents are put as one, and these are more scrutiny. I haven't looked at the current one, but I remember I looked at the draft 4 and draft 5, and I think it hasn't changed much, especially the draft 5. But at least from my perspective, there are still some gaps that need to be addressed, especially it doesn't talk so much about livelihood support. When you do a resettlement, one of the key things that we have been struggling with is livelihood support. We find that most national laws are not so explicit about it. Of course, those national laws specifically mention resettlement action plan, but at least it talks about compensation and I think India, for instance, have a very good national law that more or less comes close to best practice because they provide a lot of input into compensation. So there are 5 things that normally is looked at. For instance, the market value, and then the person gets 30% solatium of the market value, and then 12% interest from the date of notice to the time the compensation is paid. You get a 12% interest on the value. And then, of course, the other damages that they assess, like crops or any other thing that, and then of course transport, transport or livelihood assessment. So there are these about 4 or 5 that needs, and they have a mechanism also, which clearly I think in law when and how they update or review compatibility. So these are some of the things that when you are writing an impact assessment, you need to show what the borrower's laws are, how this can be bridged to ensure that they meet international standards. Now, just to share with you again some common social risks that in implement bank project we do come across and why it is important to do a very good social impact assessment. Social impact, and when you're doing, for instance, like resettlement, it's likely to affect people's lives and communities, especially the poor and disadvantaged. And so you need to ensure that these are identified and measures put in place so that they do not suffer unduly. Then gender differentiated impacts. Sometimes project activities could exacerbate gender-based violence or violence against children as well. See, sometimes when a project brings in more people, import labor from other areas, it could kind of affect the gender issues already in the area. So these are things that need to be identified. Whether pre-project, what was the status, and during and after project, what is likely to be the impact. So I just put this one also for you to know the type of risks and impacts that are associated with the project and why it is important. So the same thing here. Projects will lead to loss of culture, heritage, could have human rights impact, exacerbate community health if there are more people coming in. So let's look at the VES professional risk, environmental risk. So to do that, let me just start by telling you a bit my background and how I came to work as a social development. So that since I also have the same background as a land economist, maybe you will see through and see that it's not beyond your reach and that you can do it even better maybe. So I have a land economics degree. I did my master's in land management. Then I went on to do a PhD in development studies. But the only thing I did in addition to that during my PhD was to study something about politics of development. So I had to look at a bit of political institutions, authority, legitimacy of authority, and how they control resources. So kind of read a bit about politics, political science for that matter, because my supervisor was a political scientist. And then I did a bit about ethnographic study, that's be able to embed yourself in the community to understand the cultural dynamics and how people respond to issues. So that's perhaps my academic background. But then after my master's, I was in the Center for Land Studies for a year, and then I joined the Land Administration Project, working on customary land administration. Then somehow I found myself working in a consulting firm after I left the Land Administration Project, and were to advise Newmont in its Achim Mine project. So I went in, I didn't know what was involved. I thought I was going to do basic land administration, land management. But that was the first time I got to know about the ISC standard, because my second day in that office put a draft resettlement action plan before me to review. And I had never really seen a RAP in my life before. So I had to kind of learn by doing. I read the performance analysis, and that is how I started kind of bringing my educational background into practice. So once you have every land economist has a strong understanding of customary law, the national laws on resettlement. So it helps. You will learn a bit more, but at least it helps. So that is how I got to do involved in resettlement issue with Newmont Achim project for a few years. Then I left, came back and continued. And then I found myself being a consultant to the World Bank because they just wanted somebody to do some reviews on resettlement action plan, and somebody had mentioned my name. So I was called by the person in that office then, a senior Senegalese specialist. We had a chat, and then sort of just wanted me to review, and I started. Eventually, I got into the banks in Ghana, and I operated from there and went across Liberia and Sierra Leone. And then a few years, kind of 2 years, I had to move, or maybe I identified an opportunity in Washington. I moved here. Now, what I did when I was in Ghana was more on direct support to country offices. I mean, supporting the government teams in implementing projects. So it's like operations. What I'm doing here is supporting my colleague bank staff in their countries to ensure that country teams are able to address social and environmental issues regarding bank support projects in the various countries. But this time I'm not working in Africa, I'm rather working in South Asia, which covers Afghanistan, Pakistan, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and India. India being the biggest country, and then Bhutan. Yeah. So that is how I find myself in the World Bank, and that's what I'm doing. And of course, every land economy has its background. Land economy, of course, is a social science discipline, and every land economy is trained to be able to do valuation, viability and feasibility studies. We do estate management. We do that. So we have that background, which fits into the social aspect. Now, my check also indicates that the VES division of the GIS is kind of refocusing on what to do, which I perfectly agree. Because if you ask me, I left school, land economy in almost 20-something years now, and have not been able to become a GIS now because my mainstream activity had never been valuation, which I think was an over-concentration of the requirements to become a member of the group. And so some of first, and I just this morning I was chatting with my colleagues on our platform, which Zinzi is involved, and I realized that about half the class, we're about 42, are not yet GIs. And I sent a message to somebody and told me that I failed to become a member. I realized that the person was frustrated because he wants to, but you know, your job you do every day, if it does, it's not valuation, then it tends to kind of stall the process. So I thought this is good. It fits in very well with, for instance, in my area of activity I'm doing now, because I see clearly people will be able to, and I've reviewed documents before where I see that somebody has a job, maybe to do a risk assessment assessment or do environmental assessment, and he is doing some valuation. And maybe he only gets the land economist to do the valuation, give him the metrics, and he does the report. But in actual fact, if you are doing a RAP or you are doing a risk assessment policy framework, the major work is the valuation. If you can do the valuation, then the rest is report work. So why can't somebody who has a background in land economy not be able to do a risk assessment or do a social impact and add the valuation, which is the one of the key things a land economist should be able to produce. So I thought that is very good. And so if you are now kind of providing opportunity for some of us who have long been away because we don't find ourselves in the mainstream valuation activity, then it's worthy of a rethinking and a refocus. So I see that you have this, and I see safeguards to fit in perfectly with land use planning and environmental sustainability, and of course the land administration and management aspect. Land information is yes, sometimes that is even used in terms of grievance management. I've seen people develop models where they are able to capture where complaints along bank finance projects are and develop, and you can see clearly what probably could be. You can use that to analyze and see what probably could be the issues and develop mechanisms to address them. So I think that's a good really, I wouldn't say restructuring technology, getting back to the basic and broadening the scope to be able to absorb. And there are a whole lot of people I know who are doing things a bit different. if you take some of the financial, I mean, like the World Bank, for instance, most people who are even in the policy sector of environmental and social are lawyers. And so if you have a legal background, it means that if you even some bit of education and interest, you can even still become a policy person within the E&I consultancy or in the business area that you can be involved. Now, so from my perspective, a land economist should be interested and be able to do a social analysis and impact assessment. And of course, most importantly, engage yourself, try to educate yourself with what is stakeholder analysis, which is key and very, very critical. You would want to associate with professional bodies or groups that do impact assessment. And one big such group is the IAI, this is the International Association for Impact Assessment. I mean, you don't go through much to become a member. And as much as every year you can pay your membership fee, at least about $100 for developing countries. If you are living in a what they call advanced country, you pay about $150. And they do yearly conferences. The next one I think is Spain. After that, Canada. They do a lot of monthly trainings, which you can join. Of course, that one you pay separately. But then it's one of the biggest bodies that I think. And then also, because by training and by your qualification now, you are more suited to social. If you work with environmental experts, it means you can collaborate when it comes to an ESI. And of course, note that as a social scientist, you are also going to be limited in some areas. For instance, you might not be somebody very knowledgeable on gender-based violence issues. So you need to engage with such people to learn a bit. You might not be able to do disability issues. Of course, we are also learning every day. And as an individual, as a group, you should also be interested in stakeholder consultation. So if you live in an area or your hometown and there's a project ongoing, whether it's World Bank or African Development Bank, I mean, you should be interested because your knowledge and background will help the community. I mean, we do evaluation and sometimes you realize that from my background, when I review it, I could see that sometimes this is not fair. You know, you want to challenge the basis of the evaluation because sometimes they don't engage professionals to do, they can put figures in. But if you're a community member, I mean, you can provide that service, a community service. Just be interested, read the document, see the evaluation that has been done, and by so doing, you get to know the project. And who knows, maybe you could be involved in the long term sometimes. But I also think that as a professional body, you could also consider social impact assessment as part of accreditation program for members who want to participate in the relevant faculties that we are proposing. So this based on what safeguards is and what is required to be done, and what I know a land economy is capable of doing and is equipped with my thinking. Otherwise, these are my suggestions also that additional skills and training and capacity could be acquired. There is an online-based training on the environmental and social framework on the World Bank website. It's free of charge. I think the only cost to you is your internet. It's about 2 hours, but I think it's worthy of it because you get to know and learn a lot about the World Bank specifically. But you could check other IFIs, there was African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, they have very good policies as well. Then there is this summer school, Land Acquisition, Resettlement, and Social Services. It's run in 2 locations. I did this last year in Groningen, that's in Netherlands. Then there's one in Maputo, which is Mozambique. Yeah, Mozambique. Mozambique. Maputo is Mozambique, yes. Last year when I was there, I think I was there with a couple of Ghanaians, some in government, about 8, but I came from the World Bank side. And it's very good, very seasoned and practical expert. It gives you a lot of knowledge and methods. Again, just as the IAI is a big body of professionals. Some of them, if you're able to have a network with them, you will learn a lot. They have a huge resource base of impact assessment. They have guidelines. So this kind of network will also help you to learn and improve and adopt quickly. And then we have the social impact assessment short course, also organized by the Community Insights Group. So these are my suggestions for those who are interested and want to build their capacity on safeguards to follow up on that. So in conclusion, and if anything at all, these are my final words, that ENS, Environmental and Social Safeguards, seeks to protect people's environment. And then for each country, your country systems need to be aligned with international best practice of sustainable development. That is essentially what the IFI's policies seek to do when you review them together. So the World Bank safeguard policies and ESF will facilitate the achievement of extreme goals of eradicating poverty and promoting shared prosperity. And we need to do risk and impact management because the success of every project will depend on how good or bad assessment is done. It will avoid delays and conflicts. And we need to have that. But then my suggestion is for a VS professional, you have the foundation skills, but a bit more an interest in conducting social analysis is more useful. I have this resource which you can look through. Send it. I think I've already shared the presentation with your team. And so we can now go for Q&A. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Charles, for such an insightful presentation, all the way from Washington, D.C. We are so grateful. Charles, receive our virtual applause.
Thank you very much. And thanks to technology for making this possible.
Yes, thank you. Members, we are expanding our frontiers and restructuring into practice areas. In fact, Charles put it well, refocusing, not restructuring, because we have it, but we had previously focused on few areas. So we need to refocus into practice areas so we can become experts and excel in our fields. I am happy to announce to you that Charles has accepted to be one of the facilitators for land use planning and environmental sustainability as one of our practice areas. So he's going to help us build our capacity in this field. We are very grateful, Charles. Before we will have a Q&A session, and then we will also take a brief address from our past president, Surveyor Marty, who happens to be practicing in this field. But before we do that, we want to acknowledge our sponsors, our generous sponsors, for making this virtual seminar happen. And we have a few firms here: Property Appraisal and Investment Consult, GOIL, Lands Commission, Land Valuation and Investment Associates, Gold Street and Real Estate Consult. We also had the support of the VA Central Regional Branch. We are so grateful to you. OSL, we are grateful. Our past president, Madam Surveyor Yvonne Sowa from Alpha Properties, we are grateful. R&G Services, 10th Generation Technology Systems, we are very grateful. And then another sponsor, Valuation and Development Services, that is our past president, Surveyor Samuel Furiofe. We thank you so much. We have a new sponsor coming on board, Center Properties. We are so grateful to you. We have a tall list of individual sponsors, which we cannot mention now because of time. We will, at the appropriate time, acknowledge them. We are so grateful to you. We will take a brief address from Surveyor Mate. Pipi, kindly unmute and let us hear you.
All right. Thank you very much, Stella. I believe you can hear me. Stella, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Good, thank you very much.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. In fact, this is an excellent presentation from Charles. As VES people, it's important to understand these new areas as we expand our frontiers. Hitherto, we have all tried to cram ourselves into the evaluation space, and it's not helping. And these are areas that our expertise would be needed. Like he said, you find out that other professionals are rather handling the issue of environmental impact assessment and resettlement action plan. But if you look at it carefully, the VES person is better placed to work in that area more than any other professional. So it's important we increase our expertise in that area so that we become more useful to society and to our profession. This presentation has highlighted on a lot of important issues, and I believe that we all took notice of what Charles took us through. So let us all be mindful and let us all consider these new areas so that we will be able to perform excellently our profession and become useful. I'm very happy about all the issues Charles have said. We have been practicing it, myself and the others within the land management issues in the utilities. I've seen Augustine, I've seen my boss, Mr. Fee, and a few others. And I believe that they all agree that this presentation is spot on and has brought all the issues that need to be considered. So I'm happy to be part of this presentation, and I will thank Charles very much for availing himself to take us through. But I believe this is the starting, and he drew attention to some programs and some courses that will be helpful. So it's important that we consider it and increase our expertise in the area so that our practice will be true and true. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and God bless you, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you, Surveyor Marty. Colleagues, we'll take our Q&A if you have any questions. But briefly, I want to introduce us to a book which is written by one of us, Surveyor Obin Miriku, The Making of Surveyors. And this book is basically about, it traces the history of surveying. And the book is targeted at professionals and students in the built environment as well as the general public. 5 strategic pages in the book have been reserved for the promotion of surveying firms and their services. And we have the various categories of sponsorship there, which has been displayed on the screen. We have Surveyor Obin Mriku's number also displayed there. There are 3 categories: the diamond package, which will introduce you to a colored advert of a firm logo, contact details and services at the inside of the front page. We have the gold package and the bronze package. The diamond goes for 5,000, gold package 4,000, and bronze 2,000. Please, for further details, we can contact our colleague Surveyor Obin Mriku. Thank you so much, members, for your audience. Can we please, if anybody has a question? Abubakar Sadiq, we see a hand raised there. Abubakar Sadiq, we want to hear from you.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. Throughout the presentation, I mean, economic impact is somewhat, has someone been made silent? I don't know whether we have to assume that it falls under social impact, or is it because of the fact that compensation packages are normally associated with some of these projects, and so economic impact is assumed to be taken care of in that regard? Why the silence on that? Thank you so much.
Charles.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Charles.
Okay, because I realized people were saying it went down somewhere. Okay, so when you look, safeguards, social safeguards covers economic impacts when you're doing projects. Now, that's why you need a social impact assessment, and you would identify to what extent people's livelihoods will be affected by any project. So if you are doing a project, for instance, that may affect people's land and they will have to be physically relocated, then you assess all the losses as we do in evaluation. But most importantly, when people are being physically relocated, sometimes it goes with preparing a livelihood restoration plan. You have to prepare a plan that does not only address compensation for the physical assets they will lose, but also how their livelihood will be sourced in terms of what they were doing or any new forms of economic activity that they intend to do. So a typical example is, for instance, in a mining area, if people are relocated, they get a resettlement house, and then they get compensation for the lost asset, as well as a livelihood restoration plan where sometimes people are trained into other activities. In the same way, the World Bank projects will normally ensure that not only are people physically moved, their assets paid, but even in a situation where sometimes people are not physically moved. But for instance, let me give an example. If you are laying pipelines along a certain route, and a project in Ghana did that, you know, if you are laying it along the pavement walks, people sit there to sell. And sometimes they have to make way for a certain period that you'll be working there. And that period you have to compensate because that is the person's location for business. It's going to be away for maybe a month or two whilst you do that work. That is economic restoration. So you need to compensate the person for loss of income. So social safeguards has inbuilt that economic losses in as much as it is related to the project. I don't know whether that answers that question, because every business loss is compensated for if there's the project impacts on your activity.
Thank you, Charles.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Can I come? Hello. Can I?
We can hear you, Abubakar, please.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much. I think you've answered the question. Yes, I think most of us will know that this project will definitely come with compensation and all of that, and then the focus point will be on the economic aspect, especially from the point of view of the valuers, how the people's livelihood is affected and so on. But I was thinking that economic impact, as is it not, so huge a factor in all of this to have its own its own, space explicitly mentioned, explicitly mentioned in there, as in the case of social impact. As you ask your colleagues in the EPA why they have not specifically mentioned social impact, and then it had to be brought because of its significance. So in that same vein, wouldn't you say that, or don't you think that economic impact also deserves such a mention? Even though yes, it's all understood that it's part of the social impact, but then this is just like to seek your opinion. Wouldn't you say that it also deserves that kind of a mention? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, let me quickly, it will depend on the nature of the economic activity, because if you are doing project, the idea is, as we say, you want to, as much as possible, avoid impact to the people. and sometimes you can't avoid. So what you do is to minimize, and if you can't minimize, you mitigate or compensate. So if the project activity is such that it's going to affect the person's business, how does it affect the person's business? One, either the whole business facility is had to be moved away. If it involves a fiscal building, the building is being replaced at the full replacement cost, then the income into the business, that's also valued. So that's what I say, social safeguards has inbuilt this mechanism, which is normal valuation, where physical assets are paid if it's a building, it's full replacement cost, and the bank uses full replacement cost. In terms of income to the person, directly and indirectly, their income is assessed and compensated for the time, if it is a permanent move, for as much as the law allows and addresses or meets the international standards. So I'm not too clear what other economic aspect you are looking at. Otherwise, it's your economic laws normally taken into account in terms of the process. Yes, they may not call it economic safeguards, but it addresses that issue. It's the same as saying that people with disability are not mentioned specifically in stakeholder engagement, but they are specifically required to be consulted when you are doing, say, a transport project. Their views need to be taken on board. How would they be crossing the road? So that is how it is. It's not necessarily economic safeguards. Yes, I agree with you. You could say economic, but social is very broad enough to encompass economic losses.
Thank you, Charles. A few comments on the chat page. Let me read it out. This is from Dr. Labi. Thank you, Charles. Very insightful. Serious issues for consideration and many opportunities for the young ones. I was surprised that many of the experts in FAO who work on land tenure issues are scientists. Then from Kweku Osei, an in-depth knowledge of the field. Jeffrey is saying that it is my hope that from next year, students will not be called at all costs to have a report on valuation. A well-researched presentation. Congratulations, Doctor. Thanks for the presentation, very insightful. Okay, there's a question there from
and a quick one on Dr. Labi's comment. Yes, I agree. Even within the World Bank, the land tenure unit, I also see the same. I see a lot of geographers, and yeah, you see like that. That's how people take opportunities, and we sometimes we don't open ourselves. I, for instance, may not have taken that opportunity, but it just happened to have come my way, and I realized I could develop it for night today. So it is so. If you go around, you see a lot of social science geographers and want to end up as land experts on projects. Me, where I sit, I happen to then be friends to almost all the guys at the land tenure unit, because when they work with me as a social science, I kind of understand the land issues with them. So I've worked with them in Liberia and of course Sierra Leone on land issues as a social person, not as a land tenure. So I agree that. And thanks for the compliments from Geoffrey and other guys.
Thank you, Charles. We have Dr. Lavi's hand raised. Doc, can we hear from you, please? Dr. Lavi.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, colleagues, and once again, thank you, Charles. This discussion of your presentation would have required another hour, but I think we've eaten too much into the night already, because there are so many issues that you have raised that require critical analysis and interrogation. But I want to make just two comments. The first one is the implications for even valuation practice, apart from the fact that what you have said goes into project management and making sure that we do no harm and we do good. In terms of our own valuation practice, I think there's time for us to begin to consider what are the elements of value and what are the elements, especially when it comes to compensation. For example, the issue you raise, the woman who sits on the pavement to sell. If we are going to do evaluation, we will never consider the loss of the person's livelihood as part of the compensatable interest. And I think these are areas that we must begin to look at beyond what is provided in the textbooks and what we read. Now, a lot of the issues that boil down on people request for compensation refers to their livelihoods, and we must look at that beyond what we know. For I always give this example. You go to a community and somebody is occupying a small house with just an acre or less than an acre of a farm, but beyond that is the forest in which he gets a lot of livelihood support. When that person is expropriated and we are valuing, we value only the house and the farm. We never consider how much the forest contributes to the person's livelihood and make compensation for. So it provides us also with an opportunity to look at valuation practices of what are the social and environmental consequences that can also impact on the valuation that we do. I've already mentioned how far we go into our space. So many people are occupying the space of land experts, and they know that you are a land expert. They only consult you when you are talking about valuation. One thing I've learned from FAO, we had a discussion with one colleague who was a forestry officer, and he says when you join FAO, you don't join with your profession. The profession is just the knowledge. You have to expand your scope and know how your work impacts on the work of other experts. So you are always learning, doing a lot of cross application of your knowledge to other areas. And I think that's how some of the scientists found themselves as land experts. And because I know one lady I worked with who was a biologist, and says she ventured into land through an accident, and now she is considered as one of the experts on land issues in Africa. And we do anything, you need to get Sue also involved. So I once again want to reiterate, that's an opportunity for the young people to go beyond what they learn in classroom. The field is wide, the opportunities are there, but I think also as a profession, our focus has constrained some of us into thinking that all there is to it is valuation. So I like this whole idea of expanding and going beyond what is normal into the new normal. And let's see, I think it's a very good initiative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have just 5 minutes to finish up, but there are about 3 hand raised. We will allow them to talk briefly. We also have the poll on the screen. So even as we are listening, we entreat you to complete the forms as part of the evaluation. Can we hear from Surveyor Obiayiribi? You have your hand raised.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Doc, for the insightful presentation. As a quantity surveyor, my worry is the emphasis on compensation, that is social and economic compensation, where construction activity comes into focus. Here we are, people deliberately occupy places they are not supposed to do. And when time comes up for construction, for instance, road, drainage, by what, Doc, you are saying, it means whether by deliberate actions or whatever, they should be compensated. Is it fair to the construction activity when we know that people deliberately abuse the occupancy of the land space available to them? And a typical example is drain construction, which are now going on. You get to places, people have deliberately built in waterways. What do? Do we say because when you break down the building, it will socially or economically affect the person, so it has to be compensated? Or what do we do as people who are managing costs of construction, and for that matter, managing projects of such nature as people normally interfere? So what do we do? What do we situate
as far as these social safeguard issues are concerned, because more emphasis on it tends to increase and balloons the project cost. So it turned out that most projects cannot be completed because of some of these compensation activities. What do you say to that? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks very question. I know this has been coming up. We have been dealing with it. It's not only in Ghana. So we can discuss this in more detail some other time, but let me give a brief answer because this is really one of the issues under the environmental, the ESS 5 or the OP 4.12. You see, I started by saying that safeguards has to do with the country's own policies, regulations, as well as international laws. And that includes people's human rights as well. Now, as a country, we have our policies, we have our laws that prevents or is supposed to prevent people from building in the wrong place or occupying the wrong spaces. So if there's any problem with the law, be it the law itself or the enforcement, it needs to be addressed. But if that is not addressed and people abuse the law, you can't forcefully evict people in that sense. If you evict them, it has consequences. I always give this practical example, and I know most of you have. If you have your own land or you buy land, whether you have put a structure on it or not, you have an eye on it. Every day somebody is watching it. The moment somebody step on it, you are there to ensure that, to assert your ownership or your authority. Why is it that when it comes to the state, that everybody can abuse it? Everybody can occupy where you want. People can build in waterways or build anywhere. And then when you are doing a project, then you want to take things for granted and say somebody went there without permission, so he has to be taken off. It doesn't work like that because it is against our own laws as well as any best practice anywhere in the world. And it's not only in Ghana. This issue has been raised several times. You find the same scenario. But the bottom line is, to what extent are our laws being enforced and being monitored? People are engaged to monitor development. Do they do their job? Because if they do, then some of these things will not happen. I worked in Liberia for some time. They did a road from Liberia to Banga. If you drive along that road, you will see pillars telling everybody that if you build into that one, because it's so visible that, I mean, sorry to say, by a blind man will even see that pillar and will not cross. If you cross, they'll break your house the very next day. So it's about enforcement, it's about how stringent the law is, and it will not have the problem. But the principle is that somebody who owns land will be paid. Somebody who has a structure will be paid. Somebody whose right to land is and recognized by any customary practice, recognized by law, which should be compensated. The third category is where this issue comes, where any financial institution says that people who are living on any land, you may call them encroachers or squatters, living on any land where they have an investment on the land they won't be compensated for. But the investment on the land has to be compensated because the person carried the kiosk and put it on there, or the land was there, he started planting crops. Why wasn't he prevented from sitting there? But as long as the person is there, you can't just kick him out because it will be against human rights. So you see, the international laws, our own laws, then come into play. And the bottom line again is the enforcement, maybe. So that's where it comes. It's not the making of any institution, but it goes with our own laws as well as protecting the interests of, most often, and I'm sure you know that most often it is sometimes people are aware, they want to beat the system, they do that, or on the other hand, you must see very poor people who the only way they can find a place to do business or to sit is that space. So the laws are there, let's enforce them, and we'll not have this challenge. But this we can discuss in more detail when we are looking at the specific standards and policies, and we can.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Charles. We will take two more questions. We have two hands raised. These are people who also practice in that field. time is not on our side. We are getting late into the night. So we will take all the questions together and then you put in your word. We hope to have another time with you again. Charles, we are grateful. Can we hear from Surveyor Meister Efrie?
Yeah, thank you very much, Stella. This has been a very nice presentation, excellent presentation, and I'm very happy that this particular presentation came up. Just to encourage others, I've had the opportunity to work with the World Bank in my public service for some 20 years, and I knew what the safeguards were. And it's quite refreshing that you have somebody coming from that unit in there to at least make bare all the issues for people to appreciate that this is something that we have an advantage as surveyors, as VES. And just to say that, thank you, Charles, again. All the things that I needed to say earlier on have been addressed. But as one of the champions for this particular practice area, Charles will be falling so much on you, and we think we need to do more education so that people become very conversant with this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We want to take the last from Surveyor Etieku.
It's the most beautiful thing. This wonderful love that we have. It's so clean and pure.
Surveyor Etieku, we saw your hand raised.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please. Please, you have muted. Can you please unmute?
Are you hearing me?
We can hear you, please.
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. Our professor said that we need to upgrade ourselves. And afraid to Hamadi. Time was when the institution actually spearheaded the training of some people in this environmental impact assessment, both the basic and the advanced. There were 3 lectures or 3 sessions, 1 week per session. And I remember of that surveyor, so past presidents of the Foreign Affairs are some of the beneficiaries. The system died. Why, I don't know. Now that we are being called upon to upgrade our skill, I think our chairman may take it up whilst benefiting from online. We should also do our own local, just as it has been done in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, members. Thank you, Charles, for taking time off your busy schedules, including discarding your playtime today with the kids to be with us. We are so grateful, Charles. And we will be calling on you more to help us build this practice area. We are so grateful to you for your time. Members, we cannot thank you enough for your turnout. You have been so good. Your participation has been so impressive, and we are grateful to you for that. Our sponsors, we are so grateful. We will want to close with a prayer from Mr. Paul Farb.
So let me also just say that I appreciate the fact that you reached out to me. I know that there could have been any other person, but I also thank you very much for helping me to get in touch with me for me to contribute to this course. And we are here. We'll try to help as much as we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Perhaps before we close, we have our VS chair with us. I don't know if you want to few remarks from the VS chair. Any remarks from the VS chair? Surveyor Kubo.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Good we can hear you. We can hear you quiet.
Thank you very much, Charles, and we are grateful for this insightful presentation. But as I'm sure you have been told by others, you have been compulsory, been made a patron, a facilitator, and make sure that at least you can grow about 50 of our young ones to take your seat when you are leaving Washington. And we hope that we can have the critical mass to challenge the system, because we cannot just go there and say we can do it. We need to build a capacity and then go to the institutions, go to VRA, go to Greco, tell them that we can do it and take it from them. Probably get to the point where if they don't let us do it, we'll not do the evaluation for them. And then, and probably at that time, the Survey Council would have been passed. If you bring foreign valuers, we'll arrest them. Thank you very much. And thank you, seniors. Dr. Lavi, your passion in this area, I'm sure we'll also need you. And thank you, still the Executive Director, Surveyor Teku, for the history and the insight you bring. I'm grateful for my colleagues, the production team, Tony and Ben and Stella. Unfortunately, I have to be in Takrady, so I joined from Takrady, but everything has been smooth as always. And we are grateful for our colleagues who joined, and I believe we have not wasted your time. And thank everybody, but please let the sponsorship continue, and I'm sure we can together do great things. But I believe we've all realized that the practice area concept has come to stay, and we'll all contribute our quota. Very soon we are going to share a link that will allow members to select their preferred practice areas, so that we can begin the process of doing direct engagement with your special interest, and also any area that you want to become an expert. We don't just want it to be just talking, but want to build capacity to the extent that even people can get accreditation from international professional groups to make you an international practice person. So we thank members and want to assure you that more is on the way. This is just the beginning. And with this support and your participation, we know that anything we bring you, we are encouraged to bring more on board. And as you can see on your screen, next week we have another presentation to expand our frontiers. In fact, the presentation talks about using geospatial property identification but actually it's not only for evaluation purposes. It should be for every land-based person to understand how to align the maps and the space you work in. So I will also plead with members that just prepare for next week, and I'm sure we'll leave again with greater food for thought. Thank you very much, and the time is far gone, but we are grateful for staying till this time. So I'll give you back to Sylvia Stella for the conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Can we please have Mr. Kofa praying us out, please?
Thank you, Sylvia Stella. Wherever we are, shall we be in the prayer mood? Heavenly Father, we are grateful for today. We thank you for all that you've done for us. You've taken us through the activity of today from the morning till this time. We started this program 2.5 hours ago, and you've made it successful. We've learned a lot. We are so grateful. We ask that whatever we've learned this evening, Let it carry us along. Let it open our minds so that we'll be specialties in all these areas. We ask you to take good care of us this night so that we shall wake up tomorrow morning and continue to thank you. Bless DHIS and let it be strong forever. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 Thank you, Charles. Thank you, members. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And see you next week at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Bye. Have a good one.
Bye.